In our next test, we're looking at the spark. Here, the tip design has essentially been changed again. The front tube of this 3-strut kite is suspended with a 4-point bridle without pulleys. What's striking about this bridle is that, depending on the direction of pull, only 3 points are used for support at any given time. The steering lines are connected directly to the tip, and there are 2 options each to further adjust bar pressure and turning speed to your preference. Inflation and deflation are handled with a SUP valve, and we have a short, absolutely straight 1-pump system. Additionally, there's a dump valve at one tip end for releasing air. The frame, meaning the tubes of the GA Spark, is made from standard Dacron. Here, the front tube is sealed with a simple Kedar seam, which is doubled and stitched from the inside. A triple ripstop material is used for the canopy, and at the trailing edge we have a high-strength double ripstop material, and to minimize fluttering of the trailing edge as much as possible, there are also additional battens and small patches for reinforcement. Potential impact and abrasion points are all reinforced with Kevlar materials. Line deflectors can be found at the end of the front tube on both outer cross struts as well as on the center strut. The struts are each attached to the canopy with a single seam and are doubled and stitched from the inside, and at the transition from the front tube to the canopy, there is an additional wide strip of fabric for reinforcement. A pronounced signing of the kite is enough to supply the GA Spark with a clean attached airflow. The canopy features a mix that includes a fairly high base pull. This is because the kite generally sits quite deep in the wind window and cannot move further forward from its normal position, unless it is accelerated by riding upwind and edging the board, in which case it can briefly take an outer position in the wind window. However, it then automatically drifts back a bit. Overall, the upwind performance is consistently good. To consistently experience the overall good upwind performance, you need to use the board edge to help push the canopy slightly forward at all times. In other words, always create a bit of tension on the lines to generate pressure, so the canopy doesn't drift too far back on its own. This way it stays nicely at the front of the wind window, where it doesn't require any corrections, except as mentioned via the board edge. There you always have to generate a bit of pressure constantly. If you only use the D power, the kite will automatically drift further back into the deeper wind window. The bar feeling is very direct, and the kite's response to steering input is also very quick. In other words, the turning radii the kite can achieve are overall very tight. The holding forces are in the medium range, while the steering forces are in the medium to slightly above medium range. And as long as you don't push the kite too far into the outer wind window via the board edge, these characteristics remain fully intact. Otherwise, the feedback about the kite's position in the wind window quickly diminishes. If you don't move the GA Spark out of its comfort zone, meaning out of the middle area of the wind window, this kite has a strong base pull that is also absolutely consistent. What it doesn't like as much are modern flight patterns with high flight speeds, where it has to perform at the outer edge of the wind window, sometimes with little line tension. Then the kite's feedback also quickly diminishes. Just like with the base pull, the power development is also consistent and strong, as long as the kite stays within the inner wind window. However, this power fades again at the outer edge of the wind window. Overall, the GA Spark's flight pattern is very smooth, but at the same time, it offers really high agility with fast and tight turning radii. This flight pattern is really excellent for semi-popped individual maneuvers and tricks. In other words, when you mainly jump popping the board and don't try to build up a lot of line tension. In that case, the kite can't really be moved from its basic position at all. It also doesn't want to leave this slightly lower position in the wind window during takeoff. Accordingly, let's move on to the jumping characteristics, which really can't be explained that easily. We're really trying to prepare this for you in the best possible way. Why, how, and for what reason this kite really is so much fun. You can also see in the footage that everything works well and smoothly. However, there are one or two objections that should not be underestimated. Anyone who now tries to utilize the most modern takeoff technique, with shoulders positioned over hips, a rounded back leaning backward, and flying the kite in a depowered state for the best possible vertical lift, will find that this maneuver is simply impossible with the GA Spark. It has a position in the wind window where, if you try to load it up by pulling on the lines, the kite doesn't move to just past 12 o'clock, but really only goes to 2 o'clock. And you can't get it out of that position either. That makes any comparison to modern new kites absolutely impossible. Here, we simply have a completely different concept and a totally different idea that has been implemented. What is really fun are these half-loaded jumps, where the largest part of the lift comes from the pop of the board. And the kite is barely, if at all, moved back and forth, only slightly, out of that central middle area of the wind window, not moving much at all. And then, it truly gives you a good, consistent lift, a very steady and prolonged hang time, for which you genuinely don't have to do anything at all. And for all the tricks you want to do, you have enough time, so they really become very simple and easy to pull off in this middle section. Even with kite loops, it's important not to steer the kite too early, but rather a bit later. Because the kite turns quickly, it still manages to catch you nicely and gives you enough security for the landing. Really high jumps with more complicated flight paths, steering far to the edge of the wind window or far back after the kite loop to catch yourself for a not too fast landing. All of that is simply not what the GA Spark is about, because it just doesn't work for that, since it simply can't take on that position. You really have to embrace this concept and spend a few sessions getting used to it. And then you'll really find that in the area where the GA Spark delivers, you can also have a lot of reliable fun. Of course, the question remains, for which skill level is the GA Spark suitable as an all-rounder? Definitely, for absolute beginners, there is simply too much potential to make mistakes, which could disrupt the whole consistent experience. Accordingly, what we need here is a rider who already has good experience with the position of the kite in the wind window and knows where it can move, someone who can sense where it can go and how and where they need to steer it accordingly. For the absolute 100% professional, the entire framework is then not stiff enough due to the standard Dacron material. At some point, in the extreme range, so we're really talking about using a 9 square meter kite in 35 knots or more, the structure will start to give way, and for that reason, it's not recommended. In those cases, Alula products are definitely leading. For anyone who wants to play around a bit in the waves, the GA Spark is absolutely fast enough, and for a pre-directed style, it always follows nicely. When drifting, you absolutely have to make sure not to pull the control bar too hard, or that you position it very precisely and carefully, so it doesn't end up in a precarious situation where it might backstall after all. We were truly able to get used to the kite really quickly and had a lot of genuine fun with it. This is primarily because we only use the Spark in the specific range where it truly and consistently excels at. And for everyone who really enjoys making quick transitions at moderate speeds, switching rapidly from a turn on the wave, then throwing in a small kite loop, followed by a transition with a rotation, all in quick succession, always with a kite that stays right in front of you and doesn't need to be moved around much. If that's what you like, then the GA Spark is definitely a top kite that offers tons of fun. And finally, if we take another look at the price, the recommended retail price for the 12 square meter version is 1,599 euros. Given its truly unique and distinctive features, that's certainly justifiable to a considerable extent, but it's really quite acceptable for that particular reason. Of course, we've also done a bit of research online and had a look around. The sale is already in full swing, and by now a 12 meter is being offered here for well under 900 euros. And you can definitely say that for such a fun piece of equipment, it's absolutely worth more than its price.